least not for that. Tim was a candidate for a faculty position here as part of one of our early grants, the Sustainability Solutions Initiative, that led to hiring several people, really, Tim and Brian McGill and Sean Smith, and in a way, partly Darren Ranko arrived as a result of that as well. What I find interesting about the ensuing 8 years or so is that what I remember very clearly, one of the first things Tim said at the beginning of this talk, and he said, if you want to get to a sustainable future, you have to understand human cooperation and develop a science of human cooperation, a theory. And before and since, phrases like multi-level selection theory, which is maybe very familiar to some of you and maybe very foreign to others, social ecological systems, which was a big framework for some of the work we did in our early sustainability, has led to things like terms like cooperation science and a whole new scientific society called the Cultural Evolution Society. And so there's been a kind of a journey here along the way. Tim has emerged as a real leader in this. He had a workshop that he helped run at the National Institute of Mathematical and Biological Sciences that was looking at the coevolution of human institutions in this context, so kind of more of a theoretical approach and more of an applied approach at SYNC, which is a place that some of us go back and forth down in Annapolis, Maryland, the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center. I mentioned there's this new Cultural Evolution Society, and the inaugural address at that was given by Tim's major advisor, Pete Richardson from Davis. He got a NSF Career Award a few years back to push this forward, not only the theoretical work, but especially what I would call the applications of that. And I was interested when Tim and I were together last week that he said then, and kind of followed up in an email, that I think there's some people who look at the theoretical work and kind of scratch their head sometimes, either because it's formidable or because they're wondering, well, okay, even if you get the theory right, then how do you use it? And so today's a great a chance to kind of see both sides of it. But my favorite phrase in the email that Tim sent me earlier today was, we can't have science without theory, but theory with application is useless too. So I turn it over and just say that even though I phrased this about Tim, Tim is a great collaborator. He works with all sorts of people around the world and right here. And so it's just a great delight to have Afton here at Afton Hupper, a master's student, and Taylor Lange, a PhD student, and Jeremy, I don't think we've even met yet, Jeremy Bloom from the Vine Club software. So they're all going to do a group thing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, David did a great job of introducing, I think, some of my work and what we're doing here. Just to sort of go over it briefly, I study cooperation in the management of environmental resources at sort of any scale. And what we're going to be talking about today is this particular application of that framework, along with collaborator and stakeholder Jeremy Bloom from Portland, and Afton Hupper and Taylor Lange, who are joining me on this journey. And what I hope to sort of give you today is kind of a little bit of an in-depth look at the role of cooperation in a small part of the local food system in Maine. And I'd like to save some time at the end. I think we will be able to do that to get some of your thoughts and feedback about how some of what we're showing here applies or doesn't apply or needs to be adapted for thinking about the food system as a whole. But I'd like to give you a little bit of a background about this work in general that David mentioned. I'm a sustainability scientist, and I think one of the most important things we need to acknowledge is that sustainability is not always a win-win, right? I think it's kind of dangerous when we portray it this way. I think a lot of you probably are on board with what I'm hinting at, and that is that in the hardest cases, achieving environmental sustainability means accepting some kind of personal cost, right? It means reducing our consumption. It means changing our modes of doing something. And those are social dilemmas. When my needs are counter to needs of others or needs of the whole group or the long-term health or stability of an environmental resource. So these are hard sustainability problems, and social dilemmas are the key component of them. And they can be defined in a game theoretic way, as Taylor will show us later. The important point, though, is that social dilemmas can be solved in two ways. The first way, that we'll be spending a lot of time talking about, is cooperation, when individuals go ahead and sacrifice their personal gain for the betterment of the group. Okay, and that doesn't always stay, right? That's costly, and for individuals to continue to cooperate at that individual cost often is not a permanent solution. And so institutions are the things that can make that behavior permanent by changing it, right? We can change it into a win-win. So we're going to be talking about that in the context of local food. I just mentioned that this framework about understanding the dynamics of human cooperation as it relates to how we manage resources, how we manage the environment, and even just sort of how we treat each other. We can apply this same framework to the provision of health care just as well as we can to the provision of clean air or clean water. Is part of a much larger effort. My colleague at Ohio State University, Jeremy Brooks, and I have led some of these national working groups. Some of this stuff is coming out right now in a special issue of Sustainability Science, where we apply the framework of human cooperation dynamics at multiple scales to case studies managing environmental resources from around the world. And it's exciting, and if you want the link for this, it's on my website. But this stuff is hitting right now, and it's very exciting because we really see that cooperation matters. So bringing it to local food. Local food, of course, is something that is growing in Maine, in the nation as a whole. People will tend to buy local food because of the health implications, because of the environmental concerns, because of perceptions of quality, right? But it's very interesting when you look at the research about what people are choosing when they choose local food in terms of what they describe as local. The answers are actually all over the place, right? For some people, local means very, very local. For some people, it's the state. For some people, it's more than the state. There is not a good definition of what local is. And so I argue, especially that really what is local, really what is special about local food, part of what's causing its growth, is its social locality. Right, is the fact that when you buy local food, through most of the ways that you do it, you go to the farmer's market, you go to a CSA, you are engaging with someone else, right, around that food. And that is actually the thing that makes it a different experience and provides sort of a social value outside of just a market exchange. So this is where the grant comes in. And again, we'll be applying this sort of framework about the evolution of cooperation and sustainability dilemmas to looking at sort of how cooperation works within a small context in small local food organizations. And the grant really allows us to focus on this question of what are the dynamics of cooperation in these local food organizations? When does it emerge and when does it fall away? What are the factors that can keep it together? Okay. And so I'd like to just give you two case studies that I think will give you a flavor, rather than spending a lot of time in the sort of theoretical world about how cooperation dynamics work. What I'm going to do is give you two case studies that give you a flavor about the applied value of this. The first one is very interesting. You may be familiar with this case of food sovereignty in Maine. It's the first case sort of like this in the nation. The food sovereignty, local food and community self-governance ordinance is a municipal ordinance that was, which is the first, do you remember that it's, I can't remember.
The first one passed.
The first one to pass?
I think it was Blue Hill.
It was Blue Hill, right? I can't recall exactly. Yeah, anyway, they're a handful. You'll see the map in a second. It's a municipal ordinance which puts into place language so that people are sort of protected to be able to buy and sell mostly produce and non-meat products within a municipality. Now, I'm putting this here to show you an example about the social dynamics of a process of institutional change. Not to say that this is some particular solution about how to make local food more sustainable or what have you. It was led by a group called Local Food Rules, and Heather Retberg here is one of the main proponents of this. And the key, of course, like any municipal ordinance, is that it requires a certain amount of democratic support in order to pass, right? And so over time, the local food ordinance spread amongst a whole handful of municipalities in Maine, obviously through a sort of social network, and people adopted the ordinance and said, okay, this looks like something we want to do here. And in the end, we see that what happened is, this is as of this year, the ordinance was basically scaled up to a state law, which kind of does the whole thing for the state. This is an example, a very easy example of cooperation, because in order to cooperate to make this change as a voter, all you have to do is vote once, and then it's done. Right. So this is a low hurdle to accomplish a particular change. The type of cooperation that we're going to be looking at here is different, and I have a different case study for this. Ethan Tremblay was a master's student of mine who's now living and working in Portland, and he asked a very interesting and appropriate question, which is the behavior inside food cooperatives themselves demonstrably more cooperative than other, say, grocery stores? And this is an important question. It's actually not one that organizational science has asked, which is part of the reason why I got the money from NSF to study these sorts of things. So Ethan used an experimental measurement of cooperation to ask this question. And that measurement is called the dictator game, and I'll explain it to you just briefly. The idea with the dictator game is the experimenter gives one participant an endowment, say $10, and allows that person to keep all of it, or to give any portion of it they'd like away to another anonymous participant, say in the group. And the group could be defined as whoever you're working with. In this case, we're talking about the people shopping at the same store, even that same day. And so the dictator, the first recipient, keeps whatever remainder they have, and the recipient keeps whatever the dictator donated to them. So this is a way to measure, because this is purely voluntary, this is a way to measure this kind of unenforced fairness, or sort of altruism of the dictator. There's absolutely no reason they have to give this money away. No one will ever know. So Ethan conducted this experiment at the Blue Hill Tradewinds grocery store, and then also a mile down the road with people leaving the Blue Hill Food Co-op. He did it with people leaving in both cases. And what he found sort of matched up with our idea that cooperatives might demonstrate more cooperation, but it was the results were much stronger than I expected them to be. And what we can see here is how many more individuals tended to give donations of different sizes to their donation partner. You can see that almost 15, or actually more than 15%, more people gave all $10 to the recipient at the food co-op, whereas nearly 15% more people at the grocery store gave nothing. And then there's the rest of the skew, as you can see. And this holds up as when we do a more complete regression analysis. So this is interesting, right? Why is this the case? Well, of course, perhaps experimentally measured sort of economic cooperation is something that grows inside cooperatives because they are about cooperation and they have to nurture it. And so perhaps this is a result of that. Or perhaps these people who happen to be more cooperative are attracted to co-ops for some reason, or perhaps it's a mix. Of course, it's most likely to be some kind of a mix. But this gives you the idea of sort of where we can go with this. And the question is, when do we see this sort of economically relevant cooperation, right? When does it matter in a local food system, for instance? And how does it come and go, right? We don't sort of assume that it is everything or it needs to be everywhere, but I think we'll argue that the dynamics are very important. And so to give you sort of the context for what we actually are talking about today, I'm going to invite Jeremy Bloom up. I got to meet Jeremy, 3 or 4 years. Well, Jeremy and I started this collaboration a long time ago, 4 years ago, I think we first started talking. Jeremy's a local food entrepreneur in the Portland area and has been working on sort of marketing and selling and organizing for local food activity online since anyone was doing that. And you can find his work, and we are particularly interested and have formed this collaboration with him around his business of buyingclubsoftware.com, which is a software system that helps people buy bulk items together and to share them. And so I'm going to introduce Jeremy and let him take over, and then we'll go right from Jeremy to Taylor and Afton. And if you want to use that way. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Afton, Taylor. It's very exciting for me to be here because we have been talking for so long. And I remember when we met, he was like, "Well, what are you doing in your business, and what can we talk about?" And he was like, "Give me your data," and I was like, "Well, we have to ask a whole lot of people to give you my data," but to me, it was worth it to work with some people. They're the extension of my sort of thinking now. And it was worth it to work with academia in the sense that you guys are totally like thinking. You're just thinking. Whereas me, in the world, like I have to chase dollars and make a living and figure out how to make this business work, which is an interesting case. But anyway, I'll get on to what this is all about. I'm just really excited to be here. I'm also here. I am a co-founder of Buying Club Software. My programmer and partner Matt Hokinson is still a part of the whole thing just as much as I am, and even though he has not much time to put into it, but I'm here representing both of us. This was definitely the birth from both of us. So the first thing, let's see if I can get my first slide here. So we're all going to say this word splits. In some buying clubs they call it sharing. And so this simple diagram up here just explains what this term is, so I thought I'd start with that, just as a basic idea. This is really what makes a buying club. Although you won't see it in every case, as we were talking about before we came in here, but basically, if I want to get a better price on food, we're chipping in to buy at wholesale prices. That's the premise. It comes in different flavors in all the different buying clubs I work with and other people work with. But basically, a 25-pound bag of carrots from a farmer or from a major distributor, whatever it is, I don't necessarily want or can handle 25 pounds of carrots in my home, but I'll take 3. And Bonnie will take 7, and John 5, Lindsay 5, Emily 5, and together we make 25 pounds of carrots, and we get close to half price for getting that. And somewhere in between, the splitting part is that I'm going to put a big bag of carrots on the table, and I'm going to put it next to a scale, and I'm going to weigh all these out and give the bag to each person. That's what splitting is, that's what sharing is, and that's how we get food at wholesale, and that's really the defining factor of both my software and the concept of buying clubs. Other than that, my software is really just some kind of shopping cart that automates back-end processes for the administrator of the club so that they can just click a couple buttons and make some really awkward processes in the buying club happen. So that's splits. I hope that made sense. So the next thing I was here for is to talk about a buying club in the food system, which sort of answers, what's the buying club, where is it in the food system, and so our food system is made up of producers. I've made this very conceptual and basic. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, and I'm thinking of it from the buying club perspective, which is groups of consumers. So I'm thinking of it from a consumer's point. And you've got the people that make the food, the producers, so you've got your farmers and makers and preservers, and these are where the vegetables and the meats and the dairies and the jams and the jellies all come from. Distributors, these are the people that are usually in between, gathering all of the local or all of the producers' ingredients and products that they make and making its way to the grocery stores, which is over there on the right-hand side. And then down here we have the buying club and the consumers. And so the buying club is also a type of middleman because it's organizing this purchase and still comes down to the consumers. So normally though, you see I drew that curved line to the side from the consumer straight to the grocer. This is the normal way of getting groceries. This is how I grew up, is how pretty much everybody learns to go buy things, is go stand in line at the grocery store, go up and down the aisle, and pay 40 to 100% markup for the grocer and the distributor and everything in between, and usually that doesn't leave a farmer with much, but that's the idea, that everybody gets their take along the way. And so buying clubs come in, and instead of a 40 to 100% markup, most buying clubs will have no markup to 20% might be the maximum I've seen, but that kind of money comes in different ways. There's membership fees for being a part of the buying club, and etc. So, that's kind of what it all looks like, and where the word buying club is where buying club software sort of sits. I work with the group of consumers down there. There's actually probably one more person sitting right here. That's the organizer of the buying club, and those are really the people that I work with. They're the organizers. They're the people that work with individual farmers, and they organize the order, and they make sure that there's refrigerators and freezers and scales and bags and pens and all of the fun things that we need as a buying club to break down cases of food and give it, create boxes of someone's food so that they can walk out the door. Again, hopefully a very complex idea. I hope I've made it a little simpler. So I think that explains what buying clubs are and where they sit in the system. Oh, and I guess one of the other things I would say is that, the buying club thing there, you can see producers goes directly to the buying club down to the consumers. So in a buying club, that's the potential to go direct. And you leave out those two people who are collecting an awful lot of money that we have to pay for. So when you look at this economically, there's not a lot of money in our pockets. And so going to the producers and paying less sounds like a great idea. And along the way, the magic happens, the cooperation. And that's really what drives me forward in all of this. So all of these things said, I kind of come back to where buying, that looks terrible. Sorry. Well, this, outside of a bad picture, this is the majority of the beginning of the Portland Food Co-op. In 2012, we opened a store. This picture was the summer of 2008, and we had just become incorporated, and we had been working for a couple of years that I was there, and I think they had been working for a couple of previous years before I was there. And that group of people came together when I think it was the Green Grocer finally closed their doors in Portland, because there was really nothing left for people to go after as far as cooperative health food store at the time. And now, of course, we're overwhelmed with Whole Foods, Lois's Naturals, and the list really goes. And Rosemont, which is a wonderful store. So we've got a lot of great things that have happened since then, and I'm happy to see all the parallels that have popped up. So this group of people, basically they're the ones that inspired me and Matt to write the software. We came into this club. We were both webmaster people that had done shopping carts for a long time. And they were using spreadsheets that made it very difficult to put together an order for more than like 15, 20 people. It just got too confusing and it didn't scale. So we were not going to be able to build a big group like we needed to create the momentum to open a store. So at the time, though, we decided to make it a strategy of buying club was going to be how we stuck together. But on the side, we were also going to organize and figure out how to open a grocery store. So we wrote the software with this group helping along the way. And when we succeeded, we grew the buying club to 150 people. And that's really where the people showed up that had enough energy and knowledge to open a grocery store. Because that group of people there, we had no idea how to open a grocery store. We talked to a lot of people. It was like 6 years of not much. And then all of a sudden, the right people started showing And today we have a cooperative grocery store, the Portland Food Co-op. So we're really proud that we brought that to life, but there are many people that miss the buying club, I'll say that, because we paid less for groceries, and there was a group of us that really loved splitting up the food and getting these big cases and running around and just figuring it all out, and that was our community, and some of that was tough to hold on to once we opened a store. But that's what happens with buying clubs. That is where we were just talking about all of this. Hopefully I'll say this right. When I lose, this isn't always the case, but in this case and in a couple others we were talking about, when I lose out economically because a buying club closes down, we won socially because the group became such a success that we opened a store. And even though buying club software is not the biggest financial thing in my life, it's that social part that drives me. This collaboration with these guys, the individual collaboration with the buying clubs and how excited the organizers I work with get. The fact that I've ended up working with people all around the world, there's buying clubs all over the place, Australia and Paris, and some of them succeed and some of them don't, and there's all sorts of reasons, but I think along with these guys, that these are some of the keys that are undervalued economically in the world, and I'll hang on as long as I can to just support the good things in the world. So that's why we exist, and I'm really glad that we do, even if just to collaborate with these guys for the rest of my buying club software career, that would be great. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to mention now was the future of buying club software. So groups like this is what really make me happy. We used the word nurturing before when we were meeting, and it seems that I really like to nurture things like this. So I hope to keep the buying club software out there, whether it's open source or we just keep cruising along and working on the software together, or if we come up with some great new ideas and reevaluate the software is kind of ancient in today's world. Everybody's very used to different things. Amazon just bought Whole Foods. So there are all sorts of technology things that I may or may not be able to compete with. I believe that I could, but that's a big capital investment to redo the software. But I know that it's possible, and it could be just as good as Instacart that Whole Foods is currently using. But again, it's quite a big venture, and we've seen other big ventures. There was a company that got millions of dollars, it hired 8 employees, did something very similar to what I'm doing, and they got bought out by one of the big guys and stuffed in a drawer, and they will never be seen again. And I don't want that to happen. I want to support the social part of doing all this, helping people to sort of gather around food. So my future is definitely going to be about that, but many more conversations to come might prove something bigger and more exciting. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. As Tim mentioned, my name's Taylor. I'm a PhD student in Dr. Waring's lab through the EES department, and Jeremy used a couple of terms that I'm going to talk about. And basically he was saying, when he was talking about, the buying club is where the magic happens, and how can we nurture that magic, and really what I'm going to talk about here is, what is that magic that we're talking about? And we're talking about cooperation, and there's a reason why I call it, or we refer to it as a sort of magic process, is that cooperation, as Tim mentioned before, has to do with social dilemmas. When you cooperate, you have to incur a cost for the good of your group or for the good of your collaborator. And this is usually shown in economics and other social sciences through this classic prisoner's dilemma, where someone is endowed with some sort of resource. In experiments, it's usually just $1 or some amount of dollars. We recently, Afton and I, ran an experiment where we used bonus points in a behavioral economics class. And what happens is you're left with this choice to either defect and keep the bonus point or the resources, or to incur a cost and give it to the group to then be redistributed as it grows. And that results in these 4 different payouts. So if you choose to defect and your partner chooses to cooperate and give up their resources, that means you get their resources and the fruits of their resources, labor, and your cooperator is left with nothing. And if you both choose to defect, you just keep your initial resources. But if you both cooperate, you both get a little bit extra. But what this leaves us with is, clearly, if you're paired with a cooperator, you're going to want to defect, because you get more than if you cooperated and they cooperated, and if they defect as well, you're going to keep your initial endowment. So this leaves game theory with an interesting puzzle, because we observe cooperation in the real world, but theoretically, according to this outline, it shouldn't happen. So what we need to do is we need to take a step back, and we need to not observe just the individuals within the groups, but we need to observe the groups themselves. And what we see when we observe these groups is that overall, each of these groups have a very different fitness structure than the individuals themselves. So when you have a group of 2 defectors, if we change these resources into units of fitness, we see that the defectors have the lowest average fitness. And the 1 defector and the 1 cooperator also have a lower average fitness than the group of exclusively cooperators. So what this implies to us is that in order for cooperation to evolve, we need to have competition between groups. And so this is summed up very, very well by a very important work in socio and regular biology by David Wilson and Edward Wilson in the Quarterly Review of Biology, that says, selfish individuals outcompete altruistic individuals within groups. But altruistic groups ultimately outcompete selfish groups. And everything else is commentary. So then that begs the question, how do we get individuals to cooperate? And evolutionary theorists and economists have several different ideas of how cooperation can be fostered and how it can be maintained. And the first one is through reciprocity. This sort of this theory that humans are conditional cooperators. If you cooperate with me, I'll cooperate with you. We're all going to come out winners. But if you don't cooperate, then next time I'm not going to cooperate with you. And one of the really good ways to do that, especially if you have ongoing social interactions, is the ability to punish opportunists. And certain evolutionary and behavioral economic experiments have shown that in multiple iterations of prisoners' dilemmas, and more particularly a public goods game, which is a larger group setting of the prisoner's dilemma, is that individuals will incur a cost to punish opportunistic defectors, and that changes the defectors' behavior to cooperators. So essentially, in multiple runs, those the defectors become cooperators, and overall, they move up a fitness level. And what social network analysis has also taught us is that these types of interactions are best done in small groups. And the group size, the group threshold is probably about somewhere between 100 and 200 individuals. And this is generally understood to be the group size in which our ancestors evolved our genes in. And this is just through archaeological evidence and such, but that's the basic idea, is that these small groups are where this kind of cooperation can be fostered best. And so these 3 factors can kind of contribute, and have been seen to contribute, to the formation of social norms, which is essentially the basis behind our political and our religious institutions, at least according to moral psychologists and evolutionary anthropologists. But it's not just in religious and political settings. this also transfers into areas where social dilemmas are quite frequent, and that is in issues of common pool resources. Common pool resources present us with a very large-scale way to observe social dilemmas. And Elinor Ostrom spent her life researching these sorts of groups, and she found that successful groups had kind of developed norms that were about the same across different sorts of contexts, from fisheries to forests to irrigation systems, and she found that she found these core design principles that kind of enforced and stabilized cooperative behavior within these social dilemmas. They have elements of reciprocity, and they have elements of punishment, so they can keep cooperation stabilized. So what we find then, the logical conclusion, is that institutions can stabilize cooperation, and Ostrom's work has found this throughout all of those different contexts that I mentioned before, and there's a growing amount of evidence that these principles, through continued iterations and studies of different sorts of common pool resources, that these institutional design principles can be found. And David Wilson again, and Lynn Ostrom and Michael Cox, they basically put forward this conjecture that these principles are evolutionary in nature. They come about because they are necessary for cooperation. And where this kind of ties into our work is that throughout buying clubs and specifically cooperatives, these principles or principles like them have emerged kind of simultaneously with the discovery of these principles in common pool resource management. These so-called cooperative principles were devised in England, and they were formalized and wrote out and have gone through numerous iterations, and they also serve the same role and share a lot of the same underlying ideas that Ostrom's principles do. So how do we study this? Oh, excuse me, getting ahead of myself. So humans, essentially, cultural evolution, and humans learn through imitation. So we think, well, okay, if these principles can stabilize cooperation, then can we teach other individuals and groups how to use these principles in order to improve their efficacy? And so this is kind of what the work of the Evolution Institute through this program called Pro-Social is doing, which is something that we're implementing, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So in order to go forward with this sort of cooperation, we have to get a baseline understanding of where we are. So Jeremy has been kind enough to provide us with some data on how these buying clubs are purchasing and how they're splitting. So this purchase data shows us who bought what, and how much of what they bought, and how much it cost. And these orders occur about every week to every month, and it varies according to group. We have this purchase data from 2012 to 2017 for 27 buying clubs. And an interesting thing to note is that these clubs range from 10 to 20 members to almost 100 members, which makes them ideal groups for cooperation to stabilize and to emerge. And so this is basically what that data can tell us. It's got details about the item, so if it's bought locally, if it's organic, and how much is within a case, and that kind of goes into. Does this have a pointer? No, that's okay. So it tells us how much they cost, how many units come in a case, as Jeremy was saying before. And it also, in these item descriptions, it tells us whether or not it's a split item. So there are certain items within these catalogs that people can or cannot split. It also gives us information on how much people have taken and how much they paid for it. So we can see how these groups are splitting and whether or not there's a correlation between how much these groups are splitting and whether or not they're succeeding throughout time. Now there's another way to measure this sort of cooperation, and that is experimentally and through surveys. So I'm going to let Afton take over from here and explain our survey.
Thank you, Taylor. All right, so last year I started work on my undergraduate honors thesis, and I was lucky enough to be a part of Dr. Waring's lab and participate in this collaborative project. So we decided to run a survey of these buying clubs to collect some qualitative and additional quantitative data to help us really understand what's happening in these clubs, because the purchase data only tells us so much. It's a great data set, we have a ton of observations, but we really wanted to sort of dive deeper and figure out what's going on. So some of the questions that we wanted to ask for the survey just broadly were, why do people join buying clubs? What makes them fail or succeed over time? Sort of what are the hurdles they face, or what are some of their strengths or weaknesses? And then specifically, how cooperative are food buying clubs compared to other groups? What makes them stand out in comparison to other groups of individuals? And then how does the club structure relate to cooperation? So getting back to the core design principles that Ostrom constructed with her research, sort of how do those principles relate, or what kind of role do they play? So the survey design, we used Qualtrics to create an online survey, and we sent it to as many members of buying club software as we could. We conducted this research from November 2016 to March 2017, and we had two sections on the survey. So one section was for members, and one was for the coordinators or the leaders of the buying club, who were asked more in-depth questions about club history and club organization that members maybe wouldn't know as much about. And then all respondents were given questions regarding their experience and perceptions in the club, as well as demographic information that we collected. And at the end, we ended up with 98 observations representing 9 individual clubs. Just some general results from the survey, because we collected a ton of data and we're still in the process of sort of going through and analyzing. These are just some of the more interesting statistics that I'd like to share with you. Over half of purchases are perceived as being shared, according to what was reported in our survey, but half of the coordinators said they believe that more sharing would benefit the group. This kind of goes along with our hypothesis, because as we believe that sharing represents, or split orders represent cooperation, and cooperation is good for groups, but we also think that there's probably a threshold beyond which splitting maybe isn't so beneficial. So we're in the process of trying to figure out where that sweet spot is. And additionally, looking at member preferences, I mean, a lot of people see buying clubs as a way to save money, and that's true. About a third of respondents reported that, but overwhelmingly 84% said they joined to support local producers, which is great, because this also helps to strengthen our idea of why these are important clubs. They're not just in it to save money. There's a social aspect to it. There's a social justice, economic welfare aspect to it. And then some demographic information: overwhelmingly female, white, middle upper class, household size of 3, and highly educated. And so before we gave them the survey, the first part of it was this experimental economic game. So we played 2 games with the respondents. We played it with real money, so we used Square Cash for online transactions. They were presented with both the dictator game, which Tim had described earlier, as well as Taylor, which is basically a measurement of how altruistic individuals are towards other individuals. So it's a one-to-one. They're given an endowment of $8. They can donate any whole dollar amount to the next anonymous person. There's, again, no incentive for them to give any money at all. This is pure measure of altruism. And then we played another game right after that. It's called the public goods game, basically like the prisoner's dilemma, but it's on a larger scale. So individuals are all given this option, and then the money is pooled, and they're told that it's multiplied by 1.4 and then redistributed out equally among all members. So typically, we would expect a higher donation for the public goods game than for the dictator game because there's an actual incentive to give. And so these are some of our experimental results from these measures of cooperation that we collected. On average, the dictator game endowment given away was 58%, which is over 100% more than what the expected donation is in some meta-analyses that have been done looking at dictator games in various contexts over time. And then for the public goods, it was 66% of endowment given away on average, which is nearly 75% increase from the expected donation for that game. So both of these results show us elevated levels of cooperation in food buying clubs when compared to other study populations. And these findings support our original hypothesis which is that buying clubs require more cooperation than other groups, either require it and or foster it. So that's the next question we're looking at. And then this is just a graph to show the distribution of donations across all clubs that participated. And typically for these games, there's a cluster at both the min, which is $0, the median, which is 4, and then the max, which is 8. And interestingly, looking at this graph, almost nobody gave 0. So I think that's probably the most interesting, notable part of looking at the distribution of data. And then just to summarize, our conclusions from this first round of data analysis, which was sort of like my senior honors thesis project, was that elevated levels of cooperation are suggesting to us that food buying clubs may promote cooperation, which is important for sustainable food systems, as we've made the case before, and that they may have transformative effects by fostering pro-social behavior, which again is cooperation, altruism, reciprocity, these other regarding behaviors as we call them in economics, because we have this belief that humans are not all about themselves and they sometimes do things to help other people. And then again, like every great study, there are limitations. It's a pretty small sample, and we have some selection bias probably happening in there because it's an online survey, so individuals likely are cooperative to begin with before they even go online to take it, if they're going to agree to participate. And it takes time, and it's kind of a big ask. So we haven't really accounted for that yet, but those are just some of our limitations. But yeah, it was a really interesting study. It gave us a lot more insight into what's happening in the clubs beyond just the purchase data, and it's going to help inform our lab as we go on and plan the next steps in our research.
Okay, just to finish off, I'll give you a quick sample about what's coming up. 3 types of analyses that we'll be able to do with this very rich data set to be able to explore the dynamics of cooperation here. One of which is just using time series analyses. And so this will give us a way to look at how this splitting behavior, how this shared purchasing, is stable or is rising or declining over time within these groups, and can we use that as a reliable metric of how healthy these groups are? So we can look at these groups, we know the outcomes of these groups. Did they fail? Did they succeed? Are they still alive? Have they disbanded? And then use that to see if these metrics of using splits and cooperation are useful. Are there thresholds that really need to be maintained? Another thing which has been started by my former master's student Ethan Tremblay was to simulate buying clubs, to ask the question, well, can we make this happen in the laboratory, in the virtual laboratory? And the way in which we did this is have virtual agents that represent members of a buying club, and they participate in splits just like real humans do. But of course, when you're presented with an item, it might not be something you want. So as Jeremy said, sometimes you may say, well, I will help out these other people who want to buy this stuff, and I'll buy 3 pounds of carrots even though I don't want or need 3 pounds of carrots. But other times, of course, I want something, and other people will come in and fill up the order for me. Right? And so in this simulation, agents keep track of that, how much they have been helped and how much others have been helping them. And that gives us a sort of very real metric of this kind of generalized reciprocity over time. And agents keep track of how much they've been helped versus how much people are helping them. And of course, if they're doing well and feel like they're receiving a lot of benefit, they'll make it easier and split with other people. And the added value of doing a simulation like this is, of course, it gives you more than just a simple time-based regression. Instead, it gives you a predicted amount of cooperative momentum. And so what we did is we took the first half of this data, which you don't see here, and we fit the simulation model to the first half of the data with the same number of people, the same number of items, the same number of orders, and then we use the model to predict the future, to predict the gray dots that you see there. And the predicted line is the black line, and it's declining, but it's not a regression line. It's doing that blind of all of those dots. But you can see it's declining, and so are the dots on average. The gray line is just a global mean. And so what we're exploring now is the possibility of using these agent-based models to do some real prediction, some out-of-sample prediction, and to test exactly how good they are at doing that. And finally, I think one of the most exciting and certainly one of the prettiest things to come out of the data analysis is social network analysis. What's nice about this, again, is that we can look at the relationships between individuals over time, and we can look at that across an entire group. So we can see social and structural properties of this group as they achieve or fail to achieve the fundamental necessity of a buying club, which is to share orders, right, to share purchases, and therefore achieve what they're doing, which is splitting them. And so are there certain structural patterns that are associated with success or with failure, or can we see early warning signs of those failures? And so, just to wrap up, and I apologize that we're a little late, I still want to hear some questions. We're looking forward to trying to make all of this something that is useful, that the clubs who are in this sample can work with, and to provide it to them in a way where they'll be able to sort of, it might spur some ideas for them, and to give them the tools, which Taylor laid out as well. This is what we know about how cooperation works. You might want to think about it. It might be useful for your group. We're making collaborations with other larger groups of cooperatives around the nation, National Cooperative Grocers, the Cooperative Development Institute in the Northeast, and I have been having a bunch of conversations as well, and we have more science coming up too. So to conclude, I'd like to just leave you with a couple of take-home points, though. The first one is that cooperation is probably important for cooperative organizations, and that shouldn't be a surprise. But it's probably also important in lots of the other organizations that you're involved in, whether or not they think of themselves as a cooperative or not, right? There are places and domains where we rely on individuals to chip in. That's what we're talking about. And the key is that it's dangerous to just rely on cooperation when something is critical, something critical is happening, because it comes at individual cost, okay? So understanding when domains that are cooperative change into domains that are sort of institutional is a really important aspect of understanding how this all works. And of course, I think this has implications for local food in Maine. And finally, of course, I think that these two factors, remember, evolve in groups, and if we know that and we track it, then we can measure it, and hopefully therefore we can nurture cooperation and sustainable behavior. So thank you very much. I'd love to have some conversation. Yeah.
The agent-based model, is that introducing a spatial context to problem cooperation? Is that an important variable?
No, in that model there's no space.
Okay, I guess I was just confused. I was interpreting it as a map.
It was actually a picture of a different one that does have space. I didn't have a picture of one of the. Yeah, there's no space in that one. Sorry. Good question. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, cool. I can imagine how cooperation would evolve in really homogenous groups, but what are you learning about heterogeneous or really diverse groups?
Well, you nailed it. There's a big part of the literature which deals with that. All sorts of different types of heterogeneity make it harder to cooperate. Of course, it's possible. It's always possible, but it makes it harder. You can go to the extreme end, and we can have language heterogeneity that makes it almost impossible, right? But even smaller differences, right? The more homogeneous the group, the easier it is, because people perceive their shared interests as being the same, right? More readily. Yes.
I have
Also the talk, I couldn't help detecting a certain amount of privilege, like when it was comparing the trade winds with the other, with the cooperative, and especially when we
That's a
get
good point.
down to
Yeah.
the point, 65,000, like, well, I come from a family, well, my husband is one
Yeah.
of the ones that, never knows how many hours a week he's getting it and stuff like that.
Right.
And also, not only do a lot of people have less money, but they have less knowledge of how to get in touch with these groups and stuff.
That's a good
So-
point. So in the case of the with that cooperative experiment that we looked at, there was a big difference in terms of income, in terms of education. So these are actually slightly different populations. They do overlap some. Some people shop at both places, but we found that the cooperative effect held up even when we took into account all of these other variables, all the difference in age, difference in sex, difference in education, difference in income. Yeah. Eric.
I'm just curious the link between the buying club and sort of being this benefit for local foods.
Yeah.
In this assumption that a club is this good thing for local foods, whereas couldn't we just be like a hedonist buying club? And it's like, I don't really, once in a while we'll buy some brandy oats, but my own brief experience of the buying club was, I guess maybe it was the people I hung out with, but it was more like, oh, we can't get good curries, or look at this. It was like we wanted the good olive oil that you couldn't get at the Natural Living Center. So how do you make the connection between?
There is no fundamental connection, I don't think. You can have buying clubs, consumer buying clubs in any kind of field or domain, especially obviously it works when there are bulk things that you can buy. But I think it fundamentally just sort of depends on the preferences and values of the people who are in it. I don't know if Jeremy, if you have anything you'd like to.
I would say that a lot of this buying club stuff is about creating your own market, and so there's a lot of people that would say that the Portland farmers market is a little on the incomplete side sometimes, and I would agree. You can't buy bread there. I'm going to go to the market and buy fresh baked bread from the farmer. So by creating these markets, people are able to better consume local food because it's still an unorganized effort to get right from farmers that are around you. So this is you see this it's not in every club, but we have I have a good handful that are focused on that particular idea. So it is one of the many different philosophies and approaches to doing the buying club. Well, I can't get what I want out of this, so let's make our own market, and then we all get to hang out and trade recipes and all that sort of stuff.
Two other bits with.
So if I interviewed, I guess what I'm getting at is if I interviewed small farmers around Portland or whoever would be supplying you, would they be like, yo, man, this buying club software has changed my business around. I now am selling more stuff and my margin is great. Because one of the things that I have found is small farmers, they are struggling. A lot of them don't have health insurance.
Yeah.
Overall, we're still spending like 12% of our disposable income on food. So so I guess that's what I'm getting at.
And this is another one of those ways where, like, if I have $8 to buy some apples, if I give it right to the farmer, they get all the money. If I do it any other way, they don't.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm asking is, are there
that's right.
farmers that are benefiting?
Absolutely.
Yes, and so in some, it depends,
Yeah.
and depends on the club, depends on the priorities of the club, but a lot of them do have make relationships with local producers, and it varies between clubs. But the survey shows that a lot of people value and want that, at least in these things. Now, it's a small group of small groups, right? So the total economic impact is probably not that large. It's certainly not that large, right? One of the things, though, that I think your point made me think of, which is connected, and it's the punchline that I forgot to say here, is that is there a way that we can scale this thinking up to the size of the food system? And I think the key question there, you point out, is how well are our small farmers surviving? The answer is it's extremely hard to survive as a small farmer. Land prices are ridiculously high, and the list goes on from there. So then the question is, are they the cooperators? And if they are, then how can we lower the costs of them doing what they're doing, right? So they are producing food. We're walking up to the farmer's market and enjoying our interaction with them and getting social value. We pay a little bit more at farmers markets usually, and that's good. It goes directly to them. Still, for the state of Maine, it's not sufficient to keep a large crop of small farmers alive. And so fundamentally, we have to look at as we have seen, you have to look at the next question, which is, can we change the institution so that it is not just pure cooperation, so we're not riding on the generosity of small farmers to supply our local food, our socially engaged local food from small, say, diversified farms. So in other words, are there ways of supporting them to keep them doing what we so value, such that it doesn't come off of their backs? I think that's the next question. Stephanie?
So I had a question about the social networks. One is, are you looking at the role of kind of what we might think of as highly central champions of splitting and the contagion that might flow out of them? And the other is, are you looking at the infusion of kind of new members over time as you think about the sustainability of buying clubs? Because one of the things that's going to be huge because they're going to have the enthusiasm to split. And I think there's a weariness that sets in over time of splitting. You just don't want it.
Yeah. I think
That's two observations.
so. We will be looking at the structural questions, right? Are there key players, right, who tend to be involved in high fractions of splits, and what's the distribution of that look like, and what is a healthy sort of distribution, right? If everyone if everyone or a small clique of people are doing all of the splitting, is that a healthy sign for a buying club? Perhaps not. Perhaps it'd be better if a larger number of people were sort of more involved over time, and also the flow of new members as well, like you say. I think I probably have to wrap up. Do we have time for one more question, David? Or one more question? Yes.
So I noticed that the majority of this was based on produce. Is this kind of cooperation pattern seen with meat and like size of animals?
Oh, great question. In short, yes. And when you see the rest of, well, you won't, but there's a gigantic amount of data, and there's plenty of meat being split as well, also from local sources. Yeah, and it lends itself to that bulk thing, right? Half of a cow, kind of, right? Yeah.
So I'm reluctant to drop into a close because I bet there's plenty of conversation that could continue. Some people might need to be somewhere else right now, so let's thank Tim. But if you stay around, please do.